Hello and welcome to ELL Training. My name is Marina Johnson and I am the ELL coordinator here at EPIC. Michael Flory is the Assistant Superintendent of Accountability and he is my boss. So today we're going to look at the who, what, when, where, and why behind serving ELL students. We're going to look at some acronyms and vocabulary, the identification process, what testing and support look like for ELL students, and limited English proficient parents and guardians. So the EPIC mission of fulfilling every student's individual potential by personalizing an education plan that focuses on school and family partnership to achieve optimal student performance is our goal each and every day. ELL students need an individualized learning environment, so it's important that all staff understand how we identify and then support these students. Communication between parents and families is often hard, and it even becomes harder sometimes when there is a language barrier between the two. So we want to make sure that we are doing all that we can to make sure that every student has some success. Just because there's a language barrier doesn't mean that the student or parent doesn't want what's best for the student. We should always assume positive intent. And the language barrier doesn't always mean that the student is lazy or that the parent doesn't want what's best for the student academically. So some acronyms to be familiar with. ELL stands for English Language Learner. EL stands for English Learner. ESL is English Second Language. That one's not used as much because sometimes when a student is learning English, it doesn't mean that it's their second language. They may already know one or two languages prior to learning English. FEL is formerly English Learner, and that means a student was once ELL, but they have mastered English, so they are no longer ELL, but they're now formerly English Learner. LEP stands for Limited English Proficient. ELAP, we call ELAP, stands for English Language Acquisition Plan. HLS is the Home Language Survey. The EL program is a federal program, so all public schools must screen and identify English language learners in need of assistance. Every student has a home language survey that they fill out in time of enrollment, and that's how we gather our data and help to identify students. It helps us identify if English is the native language of the student and if another language is spoken in the home. So we want to make sure that we're looking at those, and that's my job, to look at those responses on their home language survey to determine whether they need to be considered maybe bilingual or maybe they do need to be screened for ELL services. After reviewing the home language survey, I look for anything that triggers, if it is a positive one, if other languages besides English are spoken in the home. And if there is that indication, then they may be subject to take what is called a WIDA screener. But in some instances, a student may have already been identified as ELL at their prior school, so they wouldn't need to take that WIDA screener again. We would just consider them to already be ELL, and we would mark them accordingly. Okay, so they're either going to be marked ELL, or maybe they have already tested out and now they're going to be redesignated. You may see some that are marked FEL 1, 2, 3, or 4, which means that they have already mastered out of the English language program, and we need to monitor them to make sure that they are still making progress. Okay, or maybe they are just bilingual only. So kind of an important note down there at the bottom, a student who is pre-K and they have a positive home language survey, which means that they're another language besides English is spoken in the home, they're automatically going to be screened because there is no prior records, for their school. And they must be screened again in kindergarten. So we'll screen them in pre-K, they'll go through pre-K, and then again in kindergarten, we're going to make sure that they're screened again to make sure that they're progressing, and then a kindergartner student is screened. But regardless of that score, because they are so young, they're automatically considered ELL for their kindergarten year for the current state law that we have for Oklahoma. All right, so when you have a student that's on your roster, you should be able to quickly identify if the student is ELL, FEL 1, 2, or 3, or if they are bilingual down there at the bottom. And that is going to be on the student's face sheet or their bio that's in there at the same place, and it will be marked. So that way, every time that you get a student and you're reading over their face sheet, just make sure that you double check for ELL, and so that way we can give them the services that they need. And it does say no staff will mark it. I don't even think you guys have access to do it, but obviously you don't want to mark it for any reasons other than the ELL coordinator should mark that. So once a student is considered ELL, how do we support those students? My team will create an ELAP for them, and that is the plan based on what their screener scores were, or if they tested previously at their other school based on what those scores were. And we're going to have goals for listening, speaking, writing, and reading. And so teachers will use those goals to kind of create something from curriculum or resources to kind of help grow in those areas. Accommodations are going to be given. ELL students may have accommodations based on their scores, based on how they behave, if they need classroom setting or testing environments. Those types of things are going to be on that ELAP for you guys. Currently, there is a website that's going to be shared with you guys in the resources there on the side of this training program. That will have a website that is an EPIC website that is resources that are gathered. So if you have an EL student, feel free to use those resources to kind of help guide them and write and create your own lesson plans for those students. Every year, you have April state testing. Well, ELL students will also have their annual test in addition to that, and that will begin sometime late January, February, and March, and that is called the WIDA, and that is an English Proficiency Assessment. There will be a trained teacher that will meet them in person, and they will administer that test to them. So you don't have to, do that. That's not something that's required of the classroom teacher, but that we will have a teacher that will be certified. So make sure that you kind of communicate to them about their WIDA that they're going to take in the spring. Once they take the WIDA and they obtain proficiency, means they've tested out, then they're no longer considered ELL, but they will still need to be monitored. So if you have a student that tests out and then the next year they're in your classroom again, of course you just want to make sure that you're monitoring that student just to make sure that they're continuing to grow in the English language. And so that's what they're considered, that FEL student. Okay? The teacher will monitor the student and collaborate with the coordinator just to make sure that they are progressing. These students are not required, so once they test out, they're not required to take the WIDA test again. Limited English proficient parents. So when dealing with parents, we want to make sure that we are providing material so that way they could read and understand the information that we're giving them. So when they fill out their home language survey, they indicate whether they need a translator or an interpreter. So any emails that you send, will need to be translated into their language. And we do have a program called Curiosity 2.0, and that is listed in the resources there at the side of the training as well. And that is kind of like Google Translate, but it's a program that we pay for. And I'll go into that in just a minute, but just know that we do have resources for you guys to use. Okay, schools are going to make every effort to identify those LE parents who may need language assistance. Schools are going to provide communication when requested by the family in a language that they understand. In addition to identifying the parents, we must maintain a list of identified parents as well as services provided. So those are something that the school does take care of. Once we identify those, we have those lists of parents that need assistance. The face sheet will identify any parent who is marked that they need services. So once again, on their bio, on their face sheet, when you get them and you're looking for ELL or formerly English learner, be sure it's right underneath that you look to see if the parent does need translation. Limited English proficient parents, again, all teachers have been given access to the Learning with Curiosity platform. If you haven't received an email, you will. There'll also be an Epic U for it, so you'll have the training of how to, go and find that. So it's going to allow for chat to occur between you and the parent or you and the student. So you could be sitting side by side, logged into the same computer or logged into two different computers and communicating that way. It can do text, like typing, or you can voice it into there, and it will translate into that parent's language so that way you guys can communicate. So if you're doing an ILP, You guys can communicate that way through that ILP. The parent can actually be at their home. You guys log into that website there, and you guys can both communicate to each other. If you have any questions or need help with that, be sure and reach out to me. Okay, directions will be or are going to be sent to you in an email. Definitely reach out to our department if you can't find those. If you need help with translating documents, Curiosity, of course, is one that you could use. There's also Google Translate. There's also one called Online Doc Translator and the World Lingo. If you know of any others, feel free to reach out to me. So, in addition to kind of recap, if you have an identified ELL student, the parent will be notified. There'll be a parent notification letter sent. That ELAP plan will be written and it will be sent to the teacher. The teacher will look over the plan to make sure that they feel that that is best for the student as well. And then they will email the teacher, or excuse me, they'll email me back and say, this is a go, we're going to use this plan. And then that will be sent to the parent. And then we want to remember that every ELL student will take the annual spring WIDA in January or February or March. If you have a first, second, third, or fourth year proficient student on your roster, you will be contacted to complete a monitoring survey to track their progress of the student. So when you get a new student in your roster and you see that they are an FEL 1, 2, 3, or 4, then just be aware that they were a former ELL student and they still may struggle a little bit, but we want to make sure that every time that you're working with them that they are improving. They're reading English books, they're communicating, speaking English well to you, and they're communicating through email and things like that with you and progressing. Some information here, OdysseyWare is a program that EPIC uses, and it does read aloud to the student, and words can be highlighted and translated. It is definitely recommended for ELL students. If they don't have the funds for it, just reach out to us so we can see if we can, accommodate that and help with that, because definitely we want to use something that the student can use to improve. Waterford is used for pre-K through second. It offers translation. It's embedded into the program. So again, just if you have any questions or comments or concerns about any of them, just know that you can always contact me, marina.johnson@epiccharterschools.org, and my phone number 918-261-3468. Thank you guys, and I hope you have a rewarding year working with your ELL students.